Welcome to the MSDW podcast. I'm Jason Gumpert, editor at msdynamicsworld.com. And on this episode of the Dynamics AX to D365 Finance and Operations Upgrade Journeys podcast series, we talk with Tyler Dorner, VP of Sales at WatServe. WatServe provides hosting and cloud services in the Microsoft channel, both private cloud and Azure, including many Dynamics customers. With finance and operations, the hosting and cloud services business is changing. Together with my co-host on this series, Peter Jekyll of Turn On Dynamics, we'll touch on a range of topics with Tyler, including how private, hybrid, and public cloud services are changing the partner channel, what Dynamics AX customers are doing today to plan for F&O, the future of the IT manager role in a cloud-first world, and what cloud services firms like WatServe are going to do to adapt to Microsoft's changing priorities in hybrid cloud scenarios. Okay, we are back. I'm joined once again by Peter Jekyll. Peter, welcome.
How's it going today, Jason? Good to see you as always.
Yep, as always. And our other guest today is Tyler Dorner of WatServe. Tyler, thank you so much for joining.
Oh, thanks, Jason and Peter. Thanks for having me on, and looking forward to it.
Yeah, I mean, we're excited to talk about the cloud, about hosting, and a lot of the related issues and trends that you're seeing right now. Maybe we could just start by having you tell our listeners a little more about yourself and about the company.
Yeah, so I've been with WatServe since 2004 now, so going on 5 years. Previously to that, spent 15 years in the partner channel working for Dynamics partners, managing GP Nav and AX customers. My role here at WatServe is to work with Dynamics customers specifically as they look to modernize their infrastructure and make the migration to the cloud, specifically with a focus on GP Nav, Business Central, on-prem but hosted, and then Dynamics AX customers, and then finance and operations.
Excellent. And I have to say, the idea for this episode in our AX to D365 F&O Upgrade Journeys podcast series was Peter's idea to have this sort of a theme of cloud infrastructure, hosting, private hosting versus public versus private cloud, It really, the more I thought about it, I had to agree with him because, Peter, as you've said, with the direction that F&O is taking, it's really changed how not only customers but partners and Microsoft themselves and really everyone thinks about what the future of this offering is, right?
Yeah, Jason, this is kind of interesting, when we've been sitting around laying out the topics that, were natural to get into, based on this upgrade process. One of the things that never really even occurred to me was hosting, hosting from anybody else but Microsoft. And then one day it just occurred to me that, hosting from companies such as WatServe used to be so ubiquitous in our market, from so many different, points of view. Really, if I have a lot of experience with friends of mine, in the hosting industry, and they really were the pioneers in teaching Microsoft how to host GP, in the cloud. And then I think they did all the heavy lifting on how to, take AX and put it into the cloud. And, for a long period of time there wasn't a AX deal where, there wasn't a discussion of, hey, is this going to go on premise? And if not, who are the, 3 to half a dozen, whatever partners out there that were hosting partners that we were going to talk to, about their product offering and the differences between them. And then, it occurred to me that, one day you wake up and Microsoft is hosting F&O, and what happened to that other stuff? Did these guys go away? Did they all implode overnight, or what happened there? And so from a kind of historical perspective, I was really fascinated on how did those guys stay in business, and what are they doing in business now, right? Because I can only imagine that the amount of infrastructure that folks had to build, to be able to host the kind of systems that they were hosting had to be tremendous, right? And then how do you transition to all of a sudden no new business? Is there new business, and what does that business look like? And then obviously the thing that really drove the point home to me that we needed to talk to a hosting partner was as we were talking to companies more and more on our podcast here, and folks were telling us, you know what, we may go to F&O eventually, but we're not going tomorrow, and we may not go for several years. And, by the way, our infrastructure is crumbling. So how do we, do this thing where we move our AX, perhaps to the latest version and into the cloud, right? And as an interim step. So the further we got along in our discussions with prospects and customers, the more, I really wanted to talk to somebody, that's living this behind the scenes and find out, what they're doing and how they're doing it and how they see things in the future. And so I'm really glad that, Tyler's stepped up and is going to give us drop some good knowledge on us.
Yeah. And I mean, I would say the change wave happened almost in two different phases. I mean, there was probably 3 or 4 of us back in the day who, were the go-tos for either Microsoft directly or different Dynamics partners based on, different working relationships. The Dynamics channel is pretty small, so depending on how people moved around between Dynamics partners, we would end up working with different ones at the time. But, if I look back into, back where we were kind of 2010, to go back that far, it's scary that that's almost 10 years ago now. The first major shift happened with Azure itself, right? We went from Microsoft not having a solution at all to, in its infancy, having an Azure solution that they wanted everybody to run on that really wasn't ready for prime time. So for a while, we were almost competing, with private cloud type solutions against Azure. But then as Azure kind of got more mature, got more reliable, got more stable, we realized that competing against Azure was flat out futile, to be honest. And so the shift happened in twofold. We had to move away from private cloud hosting into leveraging Azure to do our deployment. And then kind of as that shift was happening, that's when Microsoft came out with the whole the new AX, and then it was AX7, and then it was something else, and then it kind of ended up on this finance and operations nomenclature. So the shift kind of happened in 2 different phases. And, we have a lot of, AX customers, frankly, some going back to AX4 that we're hosting in a combination of either Azure-based or private cloud deployments still. And all of those customers kind of have this idea of going to finance and operations at some point. I've heard from some customers that they want to go to F&O when Microsoft has a, quote unquote easy button to do a very easy upgrade to go from, 2012, whatever version, R2, R3, or 2009 up to finance and operations. And I don't know. Yes.
That easy button, I've seen it in the marketing materials. What are you talking about?
Yes, the wonderful Microsoft easy button. That their marketing material definitely has an easy button, but the reality is it's not an easy button. Peter, you can probably talk a little bit more about kind of what's involved in that whole migration from 2012 R3 to F&O, regardless of where it's hosted. But the reality is it's not an easy button. And customers who have invested, I don't even want to know how many untold hundreds of thousands of dollars into existing deployments, maybe a little bit more reluctant to go that full-blown F&O route hosted by Microsoft. And so we do see the customers are looking for that guidance as to help us roadmap that out, but we're not seeing a ton of our existing customers racing for that finish line to get to F&O right now. And so because of that, they're looking at different options, either private cloud, like I said, or Azure based. But what we are seeing is an increased number of customers who have that roadmap figured out. Let's say it's, 36 months, 4 years away sort of thing. But they also still have to run their business today. And so they're forced with aging infrastructure, aging technologies, and they're really struggling with, am I going to go out and spend an untold sum of money on infrastructure to support AX in the interim, knowing that I want to go to finance and operations? Or is it more economical and better for the business to just take this thing, outsource it to a managed service provider like us, but then also leverage Azure to kind of get the latest and greatest in Microsoft technologies? And a huge gap that we're seeing right now is Microsoft is making changes to Azure on, frankly, a breakneck speed. New technologies, better servers, cheaper servers, faster servers, and internal IT organizations just are flat out not geared to deal with that pace of change. So by outsourcing the management of their ERP, specifically on Azure, to a managed service provider, that burden then goes to the managed service provider to make sure things are optimized, make sure they're running properly, make sure they're secured, make sure they're backed up, in ways that most internal IT teams aren't equipped to do. My own opinion is that internal IT teams who are focused on keeping business systems running, in the old school traditional way, will quickly become obsolete, in that IT's role in the future needs to be adding value to the business, not keeping the business lights on. That's a different podcast that I'm happy to do at a later date, but that's kind of my quick soapbox here on how we got to where we are with the whole Azure to D365 piece.
All right, so a million questions, and a good job on the sales job there for the next podcast. I appreciate that. Hey, so some of these questions may be completely inane because I consider myself non-technical, but sometimes I find myself asking questions that other people don't know the answer to as well. When you host Azure,
yep.
Are you guys, and I don't even know how to ask this correctly, are you guys a pass-through for this Azure environment that's actually sitting on Microsoft's infrastructure? Or have you set up your own infrastructure that Azure is sitting on? Does that make sense?
It does. And so most of our customers is we're deploying their infrastructure in a Microsoft Azure data center, whichever one around the world makes the most sense for them. So we have some customers who have multiple versions of Nav, in this case I'm speaking about, but they've got it localized to different countries around the world, and we're kind of deploying the ERP in whichever Azure data center is closest to where the end users are. That whole investment in Azure Stack, frankly, is a very large investment for anybody to take on, and unless there's a very technical or data sovereignty or data residency issue that you're trying to solve for, leveraging the investments Microsoft have made in the Azure data centers around the world is the most cost effective in our experience.
Okay, so kind of paraphrasing on my side, because a little bit of this light bulb went off. So what you guys are doing is you're leveraging literally, it's got to be hundreds of millions and billions of dollars that Microsoft has spent on setting up data centers, something that you couldn't easily replicate, obviously. But the whole value add is that expertise to manage and be that gateway and that technical resource to be able to use that effectively. And that for us, when we're working with customers right now on these upgrade projects, very, very frustrating for us to find what I'm considering to be unicorns, which are people that actually have that Azure capability and how it intersects with the F&O product. So you guys are really providing that front end expertise, but leveraging that great Microsoft investment in the infrastructure.
Yeah, and it is the knowledge and the experience with these systems that is really kind of our secret sauce. So Microsoft Azure itself is nothing but infrastructure as a service, right? I mean, you're buying a set of VMs sitting in an Azure data center somewhere. So that Microsoft will do that. They will kind of make sure that the lights are running and that sort of stuff. But the case, I'll use an example of where we kind of bridge the gap is you have a set of end users running AX or F&O, and somebody calls and says the system is running slow, or my report takes too long to run. Well, you log into the Azure dashboard and all of your servers are in the green. You have no performance spikes, you have no issues, yet your end users are complaining about a performance or a user experience problem, but there is nothing showing at a server level that would indicate a problem. Well, you can't go back to users and say, the system's running fine, because they're going to come back and laugh at you and say, no, it's not, look. And so bridging that gap between what the users expect and what Microsoft wants to deliver out of the box from Azure is the gap that we close.
Yeah, so that's starting to make a lot of sense to me.
It makes me think, Peter, about past episode that we had where we were talking to a customer, an AX customer, moving to 365, and that was exactly one of their points. I think was the pace of change and the ability to identify some of those things that may break, but in a non-obvious way. That was, I think, causing him a lot of headaches because it seemed like they were not working with an Azure-focused managed service provider. They were, I guess you would know this, right? They were working on their own, just trying to sort of become Azure experts in their own IT department.
Yes, sir. And taking a look at what those requirements were, once they started drilling in under the hood, it's pretty horrifying.
Would it have been, I mean, looking back at thinking of them in particular, would a situation like that perhaps make sense for them to say, maybe we do need a partner to really just focus on the cloud infrastructure?
Well, to me, and this is, Tyler's expertise, I think that's exactly the case. And I even have another question for him is if you're a company that is seriously looking at going the F&O route on premise, and you have to replicate all of this infrastructure, in your own environment for perhaps security business reasons, what kind of lift is that for somebody? And it seems to me, from what we're talking about here, that's a pretty hefty undertaking.
Yeah, and so I was at the conference in Seattle, I think it was about 2 years ago now, when Microsoft finally announced that they were going to allow customers to deploy finance and operations on premise. And I was in the session where Microsoft said, for customers who want to deploy F&O on premise, we are not going to charge them any more to do that, which fundamentally didn't make sense to me. But the rationale is when you buy finance and operations from Microsoft for your $190 or $200 per user per month, you are getting a full-blown production environment included with that, whether you like it or not. And so to then take that and replicate it on-prem, now you're basically leaving behind all of that infrastructure that you're getting already. And unless you have a very real either data sovereignty, data residency, internet connectivity. I think the example I've seen Microsoft gives was on a cruise ship in the middle of the Pacific Ocean. Obviously, internet connectivity there is not going to hold up to anything cloud-based. So unless you have some of those very real barriers to using finance and operations in the cloud, which ultimately, let's be honest, that's what Microsoft wants everybody to do, to then go down the road of deploying this on-prem or in your own data center, the last time I looked at this, you basically had to build your own mini Azure data center. And so gone are the days of deploying AX on a set of virtual machines. You put in so many SQL servers and so many AOSs, and then you got RDS servers and maybe Citrix and servers for your ISVs and all that stuff. Those days are gone. You have to basically choose to leave behind all of this quote unquote free infrastructure Microsoft's giving you, because they're not going to give you a better rate if you don't want it, and then go out and spend untold hundreds of thousands of dollars to basically build your own Azure empire. I haven't seen very many customers willing to go down that road. Every customer absolutely can, but I think you would have a very hard time as a, IT leader or a CIO going to your CFO and saying, hey, we're getting all this free infrastructure included in our subscription, and I don't want to use it. I think that would be a very tough case for people to make, unless you had some of those hurdles that you just fundamentally can't get around.
I take your point. It becomes a harder and harder proposition to justify, given the way the costs are rolled into it, and just the scale of it and the complexity of it.
Yeah, and I mean, and a lot of the return and how customers are wanting, or why customers are wanting to go the F&O route is because they don't have to do any of that, right?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, Peter, I'll let you chime in maybe a little bit on the support offer from Microsoft. Like, I know some customers are not exactly enamored with the level of support that they get from Microsoft, but for what they're getting compared to what it would cost to get a better level of support is a very tough cost justification exercise.
Well, on the support side, that might be an entire different podcast because my understanding, the way support stands right now, is that it's the certain size implementations get one level of support, and then smaller implementations get another level of support. And I have to say that the back and forth with trying to get clarification on any kind of issues, small or large, the number of back and forth emails, the inability to talk to anybody, and the amount of time that passes has been literally excruciating. And I don't even want to bring up any metrics that we have as far as number of emails and amount of time, because nobody would believe them. But Tyler, I have a question that you may not know the exact answer to or have a clue to, but this is something that fascinates me about the difference between the on-premise and the the hosted version of the F&O product. If you go out and Google the differences between those two, you literally get to a Microsoft page, right? Not some analyst page, a literal Microsoft page that tells you what's available if you get F&O in the cloud versus F&O on-premise, right? And if you run down the check marks, yes and no, the number of no's for the on-premise version are staggering, right? And the thing I wonder about is this a technology thing because it's difficult to do if you're not in the Microsoft cloud, or is this just more gentle nudging that they don't really want you to do this yourself? So I was just wondering if if you had any insight into that.
I think it's probably a combination of both, right? I mean, if you look at the ability for Microsoft to roll out features and functions and patches and security fixes and updates in a highly multi-tenant environment like finance and operations is, it's just easier for them to do it. And then I would also say that it's probably a little bit of that's where they want everybody to be. So they would be, rolling out those updates and changes and feature packs and all that sort of stuff to on-prem customers, later. So it's probably a combination of both.
Which leads me to the question of I have this theory, and it may be something that has to be overcome with time, but I don't think that an enterprise type of customer, right, the kind of customer that that good sized mid-market hefty company, right, that has lots of integrations and lots of locations, this, that, and the other thing. I don't think that type of customer and multi-tenancy work well together. And is that just something that has to be fixed over time, or is that just something where there's always going to be an issue between those two?
I don't see how technically the issue could be fixed. I think it's more of an issue that, frankly, businesses have to just get used to. If you look at look at Salesforce.com, for example, right? I mean, nobody has an issue with that, right? You look at NetSuite, it's the same type of thing, right? So Dynamics customers are just going to have to accept that this is the new norm. You're not finding a lot of people deploying HR solutions on premise anymore. There's probably 2 or 3 mainstream. You look at ADP, Ceridian. There's any number of tier 1 providers out there that have an HR system in there. Nobody has a problem with those. So ERP tends to be the last one that has this, people being dragged kicking and screaming into this world, but that's ultimately where it's headed. So I think it's something that more businesses are just going to have to accept or don't.
Tyler, you mentioned earlier that it's hosting has been very much a relationship-driven business in a sense, at least in the Dynamics channel. It's not a huge environment. People tend to know each other even as companies change and so forth. How have the conversations changed with some of the well-known like AX-focused partners that you've known as we've gone farther and farther into this F&O world where Azure is the predominant model?
Yeah, and I mean, not even Azure, right? It's it's Azure by Microsoft, right? In a true software as a service fashion. So, I talk to, most of the other large hosting companies out there, and I don't think I think I could speak for all of us, honestly, when I say, it's forced us all to diversify our portfolios, right? I mean, our heritage going back to when the company was founded in 2006 was in the Microsoft ERP hosting platform. There's still lots of good nav and GP business out there, but it has forced us into broadening out our service portfolio. So now we're offering not only managed services for Dynamics, it's Dynamics on Azure. We're offering managed services for Office 365. We've actually just onboarded the Google Cloud platform as a service that we can layer managed services on as well. So we're now more so helping customers with managed services regardless of workload. Could be legacy systems, could be different ERPs, could be file shares, Office 365, but kind of being that trusted cloud provider to help customers get from on-prem into the cloud, regardless of workload. ERP is still one that we are doing a lot with, but we're seeing that flip and that change in that, we're doing more and more just transforming from on-prem into cloud-based deployments. And then, again, most IT teams don't know what that means, don't know how to do that, don't know how to start. So they're happy to outsource that to experts like ourselves.
Tyler, one of the things that occurred to me is that I guess I probably knew, but never thought about surfacing this thought, but you just brought it up earlier and just now, is that the mid-market, which was Great Plains, then was AX, and has expanded into this F&O space. We're really in an arena now where talking to a company and their IT department and having a 3 to 4 year transition plan. Back in the days of GP, people would have laughed at you at that kind of thing, right?
Yeah.
But now that's not an unreasonable thing, is it? And literally having somebody that says to you, here's your version AX, .xyz, and here's F&O, which is the eventual goal, and it's not this one step from here to there, but rather it's these multiple steps, and how that gets laid out. That's actually something that's not unusual, and probably that skill set doesn't exist, en masse in the partner channel now, because that's a huge combination between strategic thinking as a business and as an ERP solution, but also from the that technology on the background to be able to move you through that.
Yeah, and I think it goes back to, I think it was at one of the Microsoft conferences last year, right, where Satya said all businesses are now technology businesses. And I think that's very, very true. And most companies who, if you're a distributor or you're a manufacturer or retailer, I mean, I don't really care what vertical, except for maybe if you're in the technology practice, are struggling with how to take advantage of all of the technology that is available to them, right? We're seeing customers now who are just wanting help with everything from how do I start? What do I do? Right? I've got 25 different applications, one of them being an ERP, and where do I start? Which one makes the most sense to move, right? If you're going into a company and you see a 12-year-old version of Goldmine sitting on-prem somewhere, does it make any sense to migrate that to the cloud? Absolutely not, right? You're going to go and buy a new CRM system that's born in the cloud, best of breed, latest technology, and you're going to throw that 12-year-old version of Actor Goldmine in the garbage, right?
I want to disagree with you. Goldmine worked great.
You get my point, though, right? And so,
do you ever have to make a lot of phone calls with one of these newfangled CRM packages? Anyways, go ahead. I'm just messing with you.
It's okay. But then they look at it and go, okay, I've got all these workloads, but then there are multiple cloud options available, right? There are 3 main hyperscale providers, right? You've got AWS, Google, and Azure. Well, which one makes the most sense for me, right? My guys took a look at all 3 platforms. We obviously already had Azure as a platform, and they compared AWS and Google. And what I'm told by my technical team is that Azure and AWS are very, very similar into what they do and what they offer, but Google is fundamentally different. And that's why we made the decision to onboard Google in combination with our Azure platform. So depending on what you're doing, which cloud makes the most sense? And the answer is different for everybody. And then, like you said, that roadmap can be, 3, 4, 5 years long by the time you get the whole thing done and implemented. And I think the new reality is that never stops, right? The first thing that you move and the first piece of technology that you decide that, hey, I'm going to take this and move it into the cloud, by the time you're done that 3 or 4 year journey, you got to start over with the first one again. And so this constant evolution of technology to stay on top of what the latest and greatest is a fundamental struggle that most companies are trying to figure out how to deal with.
How often are the conversations that you have with clients deal with the fact that maybe they're already in a hybrid public cloud situation?
I think most companies, whether they realize it or not, are already in a hybrid cloud scenario, right? If you look at Office 365 and D365, for example, yes, they're both hosted in Azure, but they're 2 different ways of the Azure cloud working, right? So you still got to figure out how to make the 2 talk to each other. Most companies have some sort of file share out there that could be stored in Box or Dropbox or wherever it might be, but most of them already in a hybrid cloud deployment, whether they actually want to realize that or not.
Hey, what's if I could just ask you? Speaking of Azure, I mean, one of the things I've been watching is just how, like I think you mentioned it earlier, it's growing and changing very rapidly. I mean, new services are rolling out all the time. A lot of them are, I mean, they seem highly specialized for certain roles within maybe a development organization or in a data science realm. How many of them does your team really stay up to date with, and which ones, other than, let's say, the pure IaaS type of offerings, are you sort of invested in and really paying attention to right now?
Generalizing, I would say we're probably staying up to date on anything that kind of has an interdependency or would touch base into a hosted Dynamics workload.
Okay.
That would kind of be how I would generalize that. If you were to ask me to fill out a checklist of all the different Azure services that we have expertise in, I would have to go get what I call the people smarter than me that kind of make these things work to fill that out for you. But, we definitely have a team that is very strong in the Azure platform and in the Azure services. And the one generalization I will make is what we've seen kind of over time is the longer that a customer kind of leaves a workload running in a static fashion in Azure, the more expensive it becomes compared to newer, faster, better servers, right? So, if you've deployed a workload on a virtual machine and you just kind of leave it sitting there for 2 or 3 years and don't really do much to optimize that or evaluate what you've got, you're going to be paying significantly more compared to, newer, better, faster, more reliable servers that are coming out at the same or cheaper than you're paying for on a monthly basis.
Mm-hmm. Does that, on the other side of that, does that involve re-engineering the processes or the workloads that are running on those older servers to take advantage of the newer?
A lot of times it's not, redoing the application sort of thing. It's just changing the servers that it's running on.
Okay. Interesting.
So I imagine in the day when you were literally the hosting option for Microsoft products, in the AX world, that you guys worked really close together with Microsoft so that, you would be able to host, expertly. Where is that, where's that relationship now? Do you guys have that same, level of, heads up from Microsoft on what's coming down the road? And I got to imagine it had to be a kick in the pants when all of a sudden they decided they were, doing the D365 stuff themselves, right?
Yeah, no doubt, right? I mean, before there was a Dynamics infrastructure team that we work very, very closely with to deploy hosted AX systems. Those relationships, obviously, due to lack of need, kind of dissolved with the evolution of the finance and operations product. So we're reintroducing ourselves into Microsoft now, more on this Azure managed service, regardless of workload sort of thing. Instead of coming in it from a AX, a hosted AX world.
I'm just reminded from a line from a movie that I can't remember. It's got to be almost like the "Thank you, sir. May I please have another?" Where somebody's getting whacked on the head with a stick, right? It's almost got to be that type of relationship. Like what are we figuring out for them now that they're going to take away from us? And I'm kind of messing around because I'm not a hosting company, so I can only imagine.
But I mean, you look at, even take the conversation away from a hosting company, right? I mean, you look at what Microsoft does sometimes just inside of the application, right? I mean, you'll have, call it a half a dozen different ISVs. How many ISVs out there used to be touting a BI platform for Azure? Or, a BI platform for Dynamics AX,
yes.
Right? I mean, you used to go to, back in the old days, Convergence, and every other booth was a BI or reporting solution for AX. Now, how many do you see?
Right.
Right. It's been, Microsoft introduced Power BI, and they were able to compete against it for so long, and now most of the BI solutions are leveraging Power BI.
Jason, I think one of the things you're much closer to than probably anybody that's not inside of Microsoft, something that I would, if I had to guess, would bet a lot of money that if you take a look at the installed AX, user base and the rate that they're going to, D365. If they all decided tomorrow, that this was the thing they wanted to do, that it would be impossible because it would overwhelm the resources. But the other thing I'm thinking is that there is going to be a good segment of those that are going to take their time. And so there's going to be a long period of time where all the partners are rushing to do F&O business, and folks that can, focus on those that huge mass of trailing AX business, where companies are going to settle in on the latest and greatest version of R3 before and wait for the F&O product to be more stable and the conversion tools to be better. And then I think there's got to be a decent subset of those folks that say, yeah, we want to take advantage of the cloud, so take our AX R3 and move it up to the cloud and run it expertly. So I actually have to think that there is a significant business that's sitting there, and that's going to be trailing along for 3, 4, 5, 10 years. I don't know. It'd be interesting to take a look at those numbers and those conversion rates to see how big that business actually is and how long that, make some assumptions on how long that's going to be around. I'd
have to agree. my sense is Microsoft's in not a huge. It's two different. It's two different things happening. One is they're highly incentivizing partners, obviously, to sell F&O. I don't think you even really can, other than maybe adding licenses to AX. That's really all you can do at this point. Or perhaps still upgrade people to R3. But so at the one point, on the one side, partners highly incentivized to sell F&O. On the other side, customers not so incentivized to move to it yet, if they know sort of what's good for them, if they've been through an AX project in the last couple of years. It's just they're just not ready to do that. Yeah, and you're going to have and despite all that incentive for partners to sell F&O, yeah, I think you're right. I don't think Microsoft has the the infrastructure, the organization in place to take like some huge wave of AX 2012 customers to F&O in the next 6 months or 12 months. It's just they're not expecting it, and it's not gonna happen. There will be that subset that do check all the boxes and are good candidates for it, but it's not a big percentage. And I think we were one thing that kind of keeps cropping up in conversations I have is just the strong suspicion that support deadlines for AX 2012 products are going to be pushed out some amount of time to accommodate that line of thinking when it does become reality. All right. Well, Tyler, thank you so much for taking the time today. I think it's a really interesting role that you're playing now, and I appreciate you sharing your views on it.
No, thanks for having me. It's been fun. I've enjoyed this.
All right. We'll have to keep in touch with how things evolve as the F&O product line evolves and customer views on it, especially AX customer views on it evolve. You're certainly a good person to check back in with over time. Peter, thanks again for co-hosting this with me. I appreciate it, and for all the questions.
Yeah, thank you, Jason. Great job as always, and Tyler, fantastic work, man. Appreciate it.
Thanks a lot, guys.
This has been another episode of the MSDW podcast. My thanks to Tyler Dorner of WatServe and Peter Jekyll of Turn On Dynamics for joining me today. If you have any comments, get in touch. jgumpert@msdynamicsworld.com. Until next time, this is MS Dynamics World signing off.